the president. I think the president can't. He cannot make the difference between the Russians swinging an election and what the Russians are trying to do by just interfering in American politics. He just can't separate the two, and I think that's why he says things like he did last night after these folks.
Can I just follow on one point on that and point to Lisa, because I'm not even equating 9/11 with what the interference was in 2016. It's the comparison to the response. Do you think the president distancing himself from what the government is doing undercuts the effectiveness of what the government is doing to detect further interference and to protect the country's infrastructure against that interference?
So, David, I think your analogy works in the following way. You have the intelligence chiefs, that national security officials, saying our country is under attack, our democracy's in the crosshairs, the system is blinking red. That's what the Director of National Intelligence said a few weeks ago. All of the same kind of verbiage we had around 9/11. And then you have the commander-in-chief, the president, not echoing those same statements. And in fact, in many places, including standing next to our main adversary, not taking the opportunity to echo those statements, and indeed to undercut the intelligence community and his law enforcement community, which is trying to seek justice, to hold people accountable for the attack on our democracy that happened in 2016, and that President Trump's own national security officials say is ongoing and pervasive.
It gets even more confusing, guys, because our reporting is that President Trump agreed to have those national security officials go out to the podium or even set them out to the podium. And so Phil Mudd, who you all know, I believe, he's one of our CNN analysts. He's a former CIA and FBI counterterrorism official. He said that he believes that the only reason that the president would send them out when the president doesn't believe what they were saying was a PR stunt. So listen to him.
That was not a security meeting yesterday. Let me throw a penalty flag here. And that was not a red light. That was the White House using a bunch of people so for the next 2 months they can use a talking point that said, hey, every time somebody raises Russia to Sarah Sanders, she's going to say, look, the president directed those guys you saw and also those women you saw on the podium to go do something about Russia. That was a PR stunt. Give me a break. Yes, they got used.
So, Mike Rogers, he's not suggesting that they were disingenuous. Obviously, they want to get their message out. They'll take any opportunity they can, our national security heads, but that this somehow gives the president cover when he then calls it a hoax.
I'm not sure. I think it was great that we had all of our intelligence officials up there saying this is a problem, and then they outlined a little bit what each department is going to do. The one thing that I didn't like about it is there's just not one person calling the shots from the White House on coordinating a really difficult effort, which is this cyber problem. But having them out there, Allison, I just think good on those folks for getting out there. For whatever the reason, the president said they ought to go out there. And some have even argued that maybe it's a legal strategy that he can go in and say, these are all the 10 things I did on Russia. How can I be colluding with Russia in some other way? Okay, got that too. The important thing is we are under siege, and cyber is getting worse, and it is the Russians plus other nation states now getting into this game. And without this very public push, I think the workforce was getting discouraged. I think maybe some of our efforts wouldn't have gotten done. Now these folks can come back to the White House and say, we want offensive operation status on these types of things. All of that to me is good.
Well, and without a cyber attack coordinator, a cyber weapons coordinator inside the White House, the coordination aspect of it gets hindered. Potential operations being coordinated gets hindered. But to both of you, and Lisa, I'll start with you. What is the most effective way for any administration under these circumstances to put pressure on Russia, to communicate with Russia about that we're not going to take it? Because I think there's a tendency in the press to think, oh, well, what we've got to do is see evidence that President Trump beat Putin over the head with a baseball bat in a meeting. That's not how it's going to go. Obama said, you got to cut it out. That didn't exactly do it. What would your recommendation be to how to send that message?
Well, first, I think, David, it's got to be a unified message. So I disagree a little bit with Phil. I think it was very important. It was necessary. It was important. And frankly, it was overdue to have that grouping in the national security officials in the White House briefing room. And incredibly rare, I might add, especially to have the FBI director there, who usually doesn't speak in those types of announcements with anything but an FBI seal or a Department of Justice seal in front of him. So this was, I think, quite rare and very important, though, for him to be there, given the FBI role and mission in this space. But I think it's the important thing, particularly for President Putin, is to have a unified message, but critically to have that message come from the very top. I think if you talk to Russia experts, they will tell you that President Putin listens to one person, if he listens to anybody, and the only message he's probably looking for is one from Donald Trump. And we heard from John Bolton, if the reports are true, that President Putin says that Donald Trump raised this issue when they met in Helsinki, but it obviously wasn't very effective because President Trump's own national security chiefs say that the attack is ongoing.
Right, but Mike, he may just listen to President Trump, but when the FBI is leading the effort on counterintelligence, as a former intelligence officer, he understands that that's the tip of the spear for the American government, interdicting what the Russians may be trying to do.
Well, I'm going to disagree with you for one thing. As an old FBI guy, one thing that the FBI can do domestically is play mostly defense. So they can find it, they can disrupt it, they can notify parties, they can help try to defend against it. The most important guy in that room yesterday was the NSA and cyber commander. Because if you're going to impact the Russians' behavior, you're going to have to engage in operations that provide some disruptive end game, if you will. And all of that, by the way, needs the approval of the president. That's why we need to make sure that the president really is on board with this, because those would be offensive cyber operations that need, that would fall under some covert action plan, which would need the president's signature on to do that. Really important. If you're going to mess up the Russians, we're going to have to be more aggressive, and the FBI is going to have to help these states try to defend themselves, and so they can provide intelligence, they can provide after the fact, they can go in and try to do some things. But as I said,
how do you do that without the president authorizing it?
Right, we've heard many people have made that point, that in fact this is not just rhetorical. It's important that the president engage and be involved. But to your point, Lisa, it was so interesting yesterday to hear the DNI have to admit that he still doesn't know what happened in that one-on-one meeting in Helsinki with President Putin and President Trump. Here's that moment.
not in a position to either understand fully or talk about what happened at Helsinki. I'll turn it over to the National Security Director here to address that question.
He'll toss that hot potato right into John Bolton's lap. And what John Bolton then said, Lisa, was, well, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but according to President Putin, President Trump did bring up election interference. President Putin is our source for what happened in that meeting?
Right. Allison, it's mind-boggling that we're getting a readout of a 2-hour meeting between President Trump and one of our main adversaries, who his own intelligence community has said directed an attack on our election and on our democracy. We're getting that readout from President Putin. Look, it's mind-boggling that the Director of National Intelligence, weeks after this meeting, does not have a readout. In my experience, when I was the Homeland Security Advisor and these types of meetings would take place, well, first of all, they didn't take place without having other staff in the room, or at least a note taker who could memorialize the conversation and, very importantly, give that to our intelligence analysts and experts who could then use it, take it in, understand it, and use it to inform our efforts in the future. So to not have that, I think, really deprives our experts and deprives us of having a better understanding. But in the past, I've seen presidents come out from meetings and debrief their staff right down to things like body language and talking about reactions, and that's what you would really want to see. But can I make one other point, which is to say that to not have somebody in the White House, the cybersecurity coordinator, to not have that position, which has been jettisoned by the White House, to not have somebody focusing 24/7 on this issue in the White House is malpractice, in my view, particularly when the intelligence community says we are continuing to be under attack.
Thank you for making that point. That is so, we need to underscore it all the time. There was that position, and that person was let go.
That's right.
So, Lisa, Monica, Blake Rogers, thank you both very much for all of your expertise on this.
President Trump out on the campaign trail again tonight for another typically off-the-rails rally, but this is really something. Listen.
In Helsinki, I had a great meeting with Putin. We discussed everything. I had a great meeting. We got along really well. By the way, that's a good thing, not a bad thing. That's a really good thing. Now, we're being hindered by the Russian hoax. It's a hoax, okay? I'll tell you what. Russia's very unhappy that Trump won. That I can tell.
So if Russia's actually unhappy that Trump won, then somebody forgot to tell Vladimir Putin.
President Putin, did you want President Trump to win the election, and did you direct any of your officials to help him do that?
Да, я хотел, чтобы он...
You see, there's one person missing. You want to guess who that is? President Donald J. Trump, who, no matter what the members of his own administration say, just can't seem to bring himself to believe in Russia. Anything but overseas that. The Director of National Intelligence, Dan Cohen, said today to what President Trump said after that disaster in Helsinki summit here. The intelligence community continues to be concerned about the threats of upcoming U.S. elections, both central and the presidential elections in 2020. In regards to Russian influence in the midterm elections, we continue to see a pervasive messaging campaign by Russia to try to weaken
In the words of his own FBI director, take the threat seriously. It's no coincidence that all of this is happening as the Mueller investigation is moving into the Oval Office, as Mueller is pressing for a sit-down interview with the president himself, as former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort is on trial, the first trial to come out of the Mueller investigation, and as the president brands the whole thing a witch hunt. The fact is, this is no witch hunt. Robert Mueller is doing what the president should be doing. He's working to get the facts, the truth about what Russia did in 2016 and about what Russia is still doing right now. That's the only way we can defend our democracy. I'm going to bring you now CNN politics editor-at-large, Mr. Chris Cillizza, and CNN law enforcement analyst Josh Campbell. Gentlemen, good evening. Thank you for joining us here on this lovely evening. Chris, you first. Why isn't the president as forceful or direct as his national security team when it comes to Russia's efforts to attack our elections and undermine our democracy?
He doesn't believe it, despite all evidence to the contrary. Look, I think at this point, when Donald Trump says it, let's take him at his word. Over and over and over again, he has not been able to say Russia sought to interfere in the 2016 presidential election. My intelligence community tells me they did so because they wanted to help me and hurt Hillary Clinton. That election's over with, but the threat isn't. We need to figure out as a country how to protect our democracy. All those clips you played, Don, could have been a lot of other people. Could have been China. Could have been a 400-pound guy sitting in his parents' bedroom. He can't simply say it because he doesn't believe it. If you need evidence, the show of force, 4 big major figures in the Trump administration coming out and saying Russia interfered in the election, we need to stop them, this is a threat to our democracy. Hours later, that clip you played, Donald Trump in Pennsylvania, this is all a hoax. If the boss doesn't believe it, there's no way that the administration is as focused on it as they could be.
Right, because there's no urgency behind it. The big guy is not saying, you guys take care of this, make sure, right? So, Josh, what do I have to do? This is what you tweeted today. You said, key takeaway, if Trump privately told Putin to stop interfering in the U.S. elections and the intel community continues to see Russia efforts to interfere in U.S. elections, as the DNI said today, then Putin is either disrespecting Trump or didn't get the message. So most likely President Trump doesn't see it that way.
Well, he may not see it that way, but I think he should be focused on the fact that he does not look good here. This is very simple if you think about it. I mean, we heard today from our U.S. intelligence community officials that Russia is continuing to interfere in U.S. elections. So that either means one of two things. Either the president actually sat down with Vladimir Putin and scolded him and said, cut it out, and Putin ignored him, or the message never was delivered. So that either way should be concerning for American citizens because it either means that we're being lied to and that message wasn't conveyed forcefully, or it means the power of the presidency wasn't what it once was, and that even after being scolded by the president of the United States, someone like Vladimir Putin thinks that he can continue interfering in our elections without consequences.
Chris, I want to play more from President Trump speaking about the Helsinki rally tonight. Watch this, at a rally tonight.
I got along great with them. And everybody said, wow, that was great. A couple of hours later, I started hearing these reports that, you know, they wanted me to walk up. Here's a podium here. They wanted me to walk up and go like this. They wanted me to go up and have a boxing match. I said, whatever happened to diplomacy?
So, well, there's a lot of things there. I mean, there's a wide gap between diplomacy and actually a boxing match.
Yep.
No one was really asking him or thought that he would have a boxing match. They just thought that he would stand up and be a man as the president of the United States and call Russia and Vladimir Putin on exactly what they're doing instead of capitulating. I mean, and he skips the part where Putin undermined his own, where Trump, I should say, undermined his own intelligence agencies on a world stage and had to clean up his own mess.
But, and by the way, and I'll get to the other point, Don, but in cleaning up his own mess, that's when he said could have been other people also. Like, he can't, even in the cleaning up of the mess, he still hedged.
I meant to say would or wouldn't. Remember that. Go on.
Right.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
So go back to what he's doing there. Look, what you see there is vintage Trump, which is he is telling himself and everyone around him a story of how he sees things. Whether or not that comports with facts, it doesn't in this case, is immaterial. No one outside of maybe his family and some of his advisors, no one Donald Trump, who is not on the payroll, thought whether it was 1 minute after that summit or 10 hours after that summit that it went well. The reaction in the Trump White House, the reaction on Capitol Hill among Republicans was, I can't believe I just saw what I saw. So he creates a reality, he tells himself it, and then he uses that to scapegoat the media in some way. The media is covering, the media doesn't make Republicans say, I can't believe that just happened. We quote them saying that.
Right.
But that's again, vintage Trump.
I want to get this in, and if you can get a quick response to me, Josh, because I'm up against the clock. I just wanted you to take a look at this surprising moment from the White House press briefing with the Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coats. Watch.
I'm not in a position to either understand fully or talk about what happened in Helsinki. I'll turn it over to the National Security Director here to address that question.
So 2.5 weeks after Helsinki, top intelligence person in this country can't speak to what happened there?
So two key aspects there. First, he says that he doesn't know what happened and he can't talk about it. The second, I can appreciate someone in his position. You know, he has access to highly classified information. If he had a private conversation with the president, maybe he couldn't talk about that. But the fact that he actually indicated he doesn't even know what happened is highly concerning. And I know him to be a very good person. Talk to people who are in his orbit. He's a good man. But the fact that he wasn't briefed by the President of the United States on what took place in that meeting is going to do a disservice to the intelligence community. What should have happened after that meeting is the President of the United States should have been sitting down in Langley at CIA headquarters with the head of the DNI, the head of CIA, all of the intelligence analysts that are working on Russia, and should have given them a full debriefing on what took place in that meeting to inform their analysis, to inform what it is that they're doing. We know that didn't take place because the head spy, the top DNI, doesn't even know what happened.
Well, and the DNI, the person who's in charge of all intelligence, maybe should have been in the room to have some idea.
Don, I was just very quickly, I know you're up against it, but just remember, Donald Trump is the one who pushed for, a one-on-one meeting with Vladimir Putin with just translators that went on for 2+ hours. That the only version of what happened there that we know is from interviews that Vladimir Putin has given with Russian state television. Just sit with that one for a little while.
Thank you, gentlemen. Hey everybody, it's Jake Tapper from CNN State of the Union and FactCheck.org. President Trump's top economic advisor, Larry Kudlow, did the rounds on the Sunday shows last week, and he made a lot of claims about the Trump tax cut, and I wanted to dive into a few of them. Let's start with something he said on CBS's Face the Nation on Sunday.
Even the CBO numbers show now that the entire $1.5 trillion tax cut is virtually paid for by higher revenues and better nominal GDP.
Larry, is that true? Do Congressional Budget Office figures show that the entire Republican tax cut is, quote, virtually paid for by revenue increases and economic growth? No. That's not true. The Congressional Budget Office projected in April that the Republican tax law would add nearly $1.9 trillion to the deficit, 2018 to 2028, even when you factor in economic growth. So what was Kudlow talking about? The White House did not respond to a request for more explanation. But one thing he could have been referring to, according to experts with whom we spoke, was the effects of a sustained economic growth rate of over 4%. That's the number that the Trump administration hit for their first time this past quarter. But that, experts say, likely cannot be sustained. A scholar at the conservative American Enterprise Institute told us, quote, if these numbers are not sustained quarter to quarter, it is hard to imagine growth averaging 4% annually long term. So I think it's too soon to claim that the tax cuts will eventually pay for themselves. It's also possible Kudlow could have been referring to the CBO's estimation of the effect all legislative changes since June 2017 would have on the of about $600 billion.